Hi everyone, James here from F9 and the Freemasons, and welcome to this third and final video of the definitive guide to full vocal remixing. Now, we've been working in house music and inside Logic, but as I said at the beginning of this, all of these tricks and techniques are completely transferable between the DAWs and in different styles of music. We're concentrating here on the actual vocal work. As you can see from the end of the last video, quite a lot has changed, and I've got all of the principal parts in for the remix. Now, we're going to talk about them in a minute, but just for the moment, let me play you what I've done, and then we'll discuss how I got them to sound like this.
I've been so lonely since you went away. I've been so lonely without you every day. I've been so alone, feeling so alone. I've been so lonely, I miss you every day. I've been so lonely since you went away. I've been so lonely without you every day. I've been so alone, feeling so alone. I've been so lonely, I miss you every day.
Now, it still needs quite a bit of sorting out, and as I said earlier, I find it very difficult to do full screen capture whilst I'm doing the creative music part of things. But what I did do was pull the phone out when I had some of the principal parts going in and took some video from that. So whilst I go and sort all this out, have a look at them. Okay, so I've got my bass line going and it's firing off the rhythm of the chorus melody. Now, that's actually a sound from one of the Drumtrax 4 F9 bass patches that comes with the pack, so it's nice and clunky and it's designed actually to work with those drums, so it's working perfectly. I've got here a Chord Melodic, a Digitech chorus pedal going into an Autobahn reverb processor, and Electron's Heat doing some brilliant distortion. And I'm going to try and create as many atmospheric and kind of one note techie sounds as I can out of this combination, including this one. So let me play that in pretty much live. Now for the middle section, and this track is in C minor, so we're going to use the classic climb down from C to A flat or G sharp, then to F. Now F then takes us back nicely to C, and we could even drop a G in and then repeat. But I only want that musicality to happen in the middle section. Okay, so the locators are set. Let me just drop that in.
I've been so lonely since you went away. I've been so lonely without you every day. I've been so alone, feeling so alone. I've been so lonely, I miss you every day. I've been so lonely since you went away. I've been so lonely without you every day. I've been so alone, feeling so alone. I've been so lonely, I miss you every day. I've been so lonely since you went away. I've been so lonely.
Now, if you've got hardware and you can play a bit, do try and play the odd thing in live. Having everything quantized can really kind of suck the life and soul out of things, and having a few live played notes in that can really make all the difference. So now I've got this great growl sound coming out of the mini log. So I routed the output of the mini log to bus 4, and now I'm picking that up on an audio channel. So I can sequence it and actually record the results back in. So I'm going to do that now whilst tweaking a few things on the mini log. Okay, so I think I've got another principal part. It's a nice plingy sound that's coming out of the mini log, and it does this with the chorus vocals. Now I may edit it a bit, I may take certain notes out, but that's pretty much most of the principal rhythm parts that I'm going to be using throughout the chorus part of this remix. We've got a nice chordal section there. I've just done a bit of bolstering. I've got a kind of distorted organ note in the bottom gone in as well. But most importantly, that part works with the vocal. It doesn't get in the way of the rhythm, and the first hit of that pluck actually stands out and brings out one of the first most important parts of the chorus vocal. So everything that you're trying to do whilst the vocal's in should be always supporting the vocal. Don't put anything that's going to kind of distract from it. Now there's nothing to stop you putting these kind of hooks in a blank instrumental section if you want to make more of a part of them, or they're going to get in the way of the vocal. But as I say, the vocal is always king. Let's get it in. Okay, so I've got one more hook that fits with the mood of the track. So let me put that in. Wait till you're back in my arms again, loving me, holding me, oh yeah, loving me, holding me, needing me. So we've got this sequence going that I can filter up and make wetter over here. And we're just going to now apply that to the breakdown. I'm also going to do a slightly different part of it in the front as well. It's going to be used as part of the build-up section and over the first part of the acapella. So just set the filter quite low. I've been so lonely since you went away. I've been so lonely without you every day. I've been so alone, feeling so alone. I've been so lonely, I miss you every day. I've been so lonely since you went away. I've been so lonely without you every day. I've been so alone, feeling so alone. I've been so lonely, I miss you. Another growly kind of deep noise. Really pushing the distortion from the electron on that one. Nice bit of reverb from the Otto as well. And this is what it sounds like in the track. Little chord sound that I'm going to open up with a filter. Okay, last sound now from the mini log, and it's a nice pad that I can make a chord out of. Swimming in atmosphere, got tons of reverb on it, and I'm just going to play it in over the verse and into the break. So I've got the trusty TR8 out, and I've got a big thing for drums into reverb at the moment. The reverb is coming from this box, which I'm loving. It's Otto's BAM reverb processor. It's designed to sound like all of the kind of classics. It's got some great long reverbs on it. So when I whack a clap through it, goes on for so long it could be on your second album. So I'm actually going to put it in just at the end of this breakdown. Dirty ride cymbal next. I've got a thing for just hitting these things in on the fly for the moment. And there really is something to be said for it, because you just end up, I don't know, it just sounds a bit more natural. Now, one thing I can't get enough of at the moment is the Stylophone Gen X. Look at this. Sometimes nothing can beat a Juno, and particularly a Juno 60. It's got some of the fattest strings you could possibly wish for. So as you can see, I've used a lot of hardware to get the rest of this production going. And actually, apart from the bass line, which is coming from Logic's built-in sampler, everything else is coming from a hardware source. Now, the reason being is I find hardware far more tactile when you're actually sound designing. Twisting knobs, grabbing faders, and then firing them through effects chains, as you saw, and altering those as they go in, is a completely different type of sound design from sitting in front of plugin GUIs, and can be far more rewarding. And really importantly, if you've got access to things like distortion and EQs as the sound goes in, you can often get sounds much bigger and much more dynamic within the production, and they tend to stand out more. They're almost become signature sounds. And one thing that's vital for every single one of you wanting to remix in the modern world is that your sound has to stand out. So hardware can really help you do that. Now, I am really lucky. I've got a beautiful collection in this studio, but please do bear in mind, this is the result of 20 years in the music industry, and it's a collection I've built up over that time. This is my job, and these are my tools. Now let me take you through all of the sounds that I've added into this production. Defining the different areas of a remix is often about contrast, and in the middle of this first breakdown where the vocals come in, it kind of changes halfway through where the bass line comes in. And then I've added a ride cymbal, which I put in manually, which you saw there, just to kind of highlight that change. So before that point, there's very little top end, and then as the bass line comes in, the ride sits on top, and it instantly brings a complete change sonically. Let me play you that through.
I've been so alone, feeling so alone. I've been so lonely, I miss you every day. I've been so lonely since you went away. I've been so lonely without you every day. I've been so alone, feeling so alone.
And at the end of that section, I wanted one enormous cavernous reverb drum sound, and that's when we use the TR8 going into the reverb. Now, that sound also has a compressor on it that is ducking against the kick drum. So let me show you what happens when those drums come in. Now, using a compressor like that is just a great way of getting a reverberated sound under control, because long reverbs are great, but they can swamp a production, and particularly at the front of the next section, that's not what you want. Using the same setup, I also added an explosive 909 snare piling into reverb, just to come out of that kind of fake breakdown in the first main chorus.
Without you every day, I've been so alone, feeling so alone.
For me, those kind of drum hits are the equivalent of exclamation marks and full stops, so effectively punctuation that you would use in a sentence. Now, one little box that I can't get enough of at the moment is the Stylophone Gen X1, and I've used it here to make a couple of effects. It's got a great inbuilt delay line. A couple of great noises.
I've been so lonely since you went away.
So now let's talk about the bass, and it's one of the bass patches that comes with the Drumtrax 4-pack. So it's a bass patch that is designed to work with these drums from the ground up. It's got a nice old school feel to it because I think it's from an FM source. It sounds like this. And yes, the reverb is deliberate. It's very carefully put on there just to give it some real atmosphere. Let's hear it within the full track. But the most important thing about that bass line is the rhythm of it is actually taken from the first few lines of the chorus. Let me show you what I mean.
I've been so lonely since you went away. I've been so lonely without you every day.
So you see how powerful that is. And if there's one point that I can make across all three videos, it's this. If you can pick out key parts of the rhythm or the melody from the vocal and use them for your main musical parts, it will always work. And it will make your remix shine as well. It is quite skillful to get this right. And bearing in mind, I've done this for 20 years of my life, so I know what I'm doing. But try and experiment with it and see how you get on. It will make a major difference and it will make your work stand out. And most importantly, it will keep all of the other people that we've talked about, the record companies, the artists and managers, happy. Because when you hear that kind of thing, subliminally, it just brings the song to life. So moving on to some of the other sounds, I've got this squelchy thing that is bolstering some of the bass notes out or some of the bass rhythm out. Let me play it actually with the bass line. Now, it's going to take some careful mixing a little bit later on to actually make that fit, but that also goes along with this growl sound that was in one of the iPhone videos. And play all three of them together. Now, when I actually come to set the final mix up, it may actually be worth grouping all of those sounds together because they're working well, and a little bit of compression, maybe distortion, and then some side chaining on top, just gently, we don't want to overdo it, will really help them to sit in. There's one other tougher sound before we get to the melodics that's carrying on this kind of feel. That's once again from the Minilog, and it's got heavy distortion on it from Analog Heat. Now that obviously is a posh distortion box, but even the cheapest analog guitar pedals can do a great job of distorting your synth sounds as they're going in. And one trick that I've learned here is if you've got a stereo source and the pedals are cheap enough, just buy two of them and you'll be amazed at what you can actually get out. Because as you're hearing here, these are really quite characterful sounds already. So let's hear all of those parts working together with the drums. So can you hear all the spaces in there? There's not even a bass tone on the downbeat. The kick drum is just coming through by itself and then the bass line starts. And at the end of each phrase, there is a massive gap. But it still has enormous amounts of funk. So don't think whilst you're putting rhythms together that you have to fill every single measure within your music with notes or rhythm. And sometimes creating funk is all about the gaps. Now, the king of disco, Nile Rodgers, always said, it's not about how something sounds, it's how it makes you feel. And now we're past that main thrust of EDM where every single part of the sonic spectrum was constantly being bombarded with noise. It's great to be getting back to production values where the funk is coming through. Okay, now I've got a couple of chord risers with a heavy noise content. They're going through the chorus pedal and I'm actually doing the filter sweep live. I'm hanging the note slightly longer than it should be and then cutting it actually on the downbeat so you get a perfect chop. Now the side chaining is actually coming from Logic's Tremolo plugin. An awful lot of Autopan and Tremolo plugins will allow you to do this kind of thing, and it's just set to quarter beat, so it's the same as a kick drum pulse. And it's I've changed the wave shape so that it's ducking just at the beginning. If you can, take a note of these settings, they're ever so useful. Now I've got two different types of chords. One is rising up on the C, and the other one is rising up on the G. Now the reason G is so important is that it is a perfect musical fifth away from C. So pretty much G is going to work in an awful lot of the track. And this track is harmonically incredibly minor. So even though it's playing a G minor chord, it really works.
I've been so lonely without you every day. so alone, feeling so alone. I've been so lonely.
Now, the fifth note in any scale, and in this example we're in C minor, so the fifth note of that scale is G, is the second most important note in that scale. They are heavily connected, the fifth and the root. In fact, the fifth always kind of wants to go back to the root. That's just pure musical theory. It's how our brains work. We're pre-programmed to like that stuff. Now, a lot of underground and particularly club music tends to roll around in the drops just around one note. But if you're ever looking for another note to use in these kind of sections, then your fifth should always be the first stop. There's tons of information online about how to find the fifth, but always keep it in your toolbox. It's a very useful place to go. Okay, still on the chordal tip, there was this nice chord that was in the iPhone videos. But I'm noticing something here. I'm really turning it down in the mix. I've got this at about -10 dB. Now, first of all, let's do some gain staging because, as I said before, the most useful part of a fader is around 0. So I'm going to take the channel EQ and copy that fader position of -9.8 and stick that on the master gain. That means I can now drop the fader back to 0 and then it's easier to balance things. But my view is simple, is if you're constantly trying to turn something down, is it the right part? Is it in the right place? Now, I've had a quick listen, and even though I quite like the part, I don't think it's in the right place. So let's just listen to the vocal.
I can't wait till you're back in my arms again, loving me.
So yeah, I think I've got it in the wrong place. So what I'm going to do is pick it up and move it to the position where it says loving me. Let's try that.
Arms again, loving me, holding me.
Now, actually, I want to turn it back up. So that automatically says to me that you've probably got that in a better position. So let's just whack it up a bit, see what we get.
Arms again, loving me, holding me.
Yeah, way better than having it on at the downbeat. So one really good tip for all production, not just remixing, is if you're ever constantly turning something down, then you probably don't need it. It's probably the wrong sound, it's in the wrong place, or there's just something wrong with it. So try and address it as opposed to just gradually pull it down every time you hear it. Now, I'm using a little trick in Logic on the master bus. It's the only plugin I've got on the master at the moment, and I'm using the soft clip function and driving into it a little bit to create some limiting and some overall compression. Now, the reason why I do this whilst I'm working at this stage is that sometimes you need to be able to hear how a track's going to respond to some kind of limiting whilst you're actually setting levels, because it can dramatically change things, and often you need to fire things in a little bit more. But I've noticed that it's just got a little bit crispy, so I'm going to drop the level that it's pushing into. Let's have a listen. The other reason why I use this compressor for this kind of thing is that it's completely no latency, so I can grab instruments up and start playing extra parts in without any latency issues at all, which normally limiters bring to the table. But I have actually brought the master fader down after that process by -3 dB. This clipping function within Logic will actually pretty much level everything to 0. And whilst I do voice capture, I'm on a simple USB audio interface, and that can suffer from intersample peaking, which can really cloud your judgment. If you're wondering what this is, go and look it up online. It's basically if you level a signal all the way to 0, some cheap playback devices will cause playback problems. So just dropping the level of the master like that whilst you're monitoring can really help. So there's a sequence that I've put in the middle section of this record, as well as the intro. And this is one of the reasons why I really love working with hardware, because to automate that kind of thing on a plugin can sometimes be frustrating and completely unartistic. You are much better just grabbing knobs on the fly and reacting to the music as it plays back. And here I was actually able to turn up the reverb in certain parts as well. So when we get to the end of it, and that's the beauty of having all of those controls on those boxes with knobs on, that I can actually just grab and do that quickly. And it's probably taken me a fraction of the time that it would do to actually do that with a plugin. Moving on, let's look at the melodic hooks. Now, once I get these parts in, I really feel that I've kind of broken the back of the remix work. And this one's incredibly simple. It's really only got 2 notes in it, but it really fills the gaps that are created by parts of the production and adds real interest. Let me just play you the sound. Now, basic by itself, but then let's just put it in with the bass. Now, at that point, so every 4 bars, I've also added a high hook in places, doing exactly the same thing with a different sound. So it accents that part even more. I've got some tightening up to do because these were played in completely live, but doing so, in my opinion, often adds some real human quality to the parts that you're putting in. Now, what's important about the timing of these hooks is that the first note, the single note, which is the C, plays with one of the highlights of the bass line. And then the second notes, the ones that really stand out, are actually in the gaps that were created by our bass work. So we filled that gap that was there in the production, but not with bass information, so you still get that wonderful space that's creating groove at the bottom. But it then draws your attention to these hooks at the top, and finding these counterplays between different parts of your arrangement and different parts of your track can really help you build it. Okay, so what about the notes? Well, it's actually incredibly simple. It's just playing a C and then it's going to B flat, which is effectively 2 notes down from the C. But the B flat is a very important note in the key of C minor. Now, the actual bass chord of C minor, which is the root chord, is obviously C minor. And that is made up of the notes C, E flat and G, which is the 5th as we discussed earlier. Adding a B flat to that C minor will turn it into a C minor 7th. 7ths are rich chords and they're particularly useful in all types of electronic music. So the next noise down is the first noise that you saw go in on the iPhone videos. Nice dirty tone that's slamming into the root note there, and it gives the whole piece real atmosphere. I've doubled that up in a couple of places with what I call a spill note. Once again, the beauty of working with analog, because later on in this part I can actually open the filter back out, it's still sustaining, and you get this growl back into the distortion. And I have used the same sound to build the chord structure of the middle section. Now, this is the first time that we're changing from just the C root note. And the reason I've done it this way, so it's just happening in the middle, only once, is that then becomes a real moment. Now, anyone who knows my past work knows that I'm known for much more music than this, but this grabbed me right from the beginning. It felt like it needed to just what we call vamp on one note all the way through and then just do this bit in the middle. Often whilst you're remixing, your first reaction to how something should be is often right. It just then becomes a struggle to turn it into actuality. Now, I've doubled this up with a dirty organ note. As you can hear, tons of distortion on all of this. I've also got a dirty resonant note that does this. And then I've picked the chords out with Junos. Now, you saw the Juno pass actually go down, but I then took another pass of it with a chorus set to chorus 1 instead of chorus 2, so the modulation's different, and also changed the LFO speed. So when you add them together, they become even bigger, and being this size, they also give me plenty of options to widen them up whilst we're mixing. So let's just hear that whole section together. There have been a couple of additions in the vocal department. I did spin out a long delay after the breakdown off of the backing vocals.
Miss you every day.
And I've also got this little stab, a vocal stab that's from one of those cut-up files that we made earlier on. Works really well against the lead vocal, as you can hear there. Now, you'll notice that I've muted a couple of things. This is to bring some contrast into the production. So, for example, I've muted this vocal loop throughout the verses. Now, I'm going to make it even more apparent on this verse. I'm actually going to take out some of the top end information from the drums. What I'm really trying to do is make sure that there's a sonic difference now between the chorus section, or the kind of main groove section that's happened just before, and this verse. Now, I hope you could hear just subtly in the background that vocal loop came back in, and there is a little lift on the drums. I'm probably going to accentuate that further on in the track with tambourines and that kind of thing, just to really add some high-end interest. And the whole idea is to almost sectionalize the bit so there is movement and dynamics between choruses, verses, and groove sections. So I'm kind of done on this. I feel that the whole thing's in a really good place, and now it's time to piece the whole thing together. I'm going to start looking at all the aspects of the mix soon, but I've been mixing as I go, so we're in good shape. But one thing I do want to quickly draw your attention to is look at the processing on the drums. There's hardly anything. I think there's just one EQ. Now that is, and a completely blatant plug here, it's because I'm using the F9 Drumtrax. And don't forget that all of the vocals that we're using here are from Katherine Ellis's brilliant Diva accapellas sample pack that's available on Loopmasters. It's got another 4 accapellas on there, and she has not held back on places. Katherine is known for having an enormous voice. Okay, so we're done, and I've gone about as far as I can with this. A lot's changed, as you can see, particularly the colour scheme. Now, the reason I've dulled everything down is so that I can highlight certain bits. So anything that's in this kind of shocking pink colour on the screen, as opposed to the kind of dull stuff next to it, is it's been turned down. And I've done that by coming over to the region parameters and just dropping the gain of the individual audio regions. Anything that's in this sharp blue, like these claps at the top here, has been turned up. So if we look at the claps, originally they were at -2, but for that section they're up to +1.4. So that's a 3 dB rise, just to make the claps cut through in the breakdown. So you can see that the track is kind of peppered with red bits and blue bits, so that can show you some of the work that I've done, particularly on these vocals. So I've turned the first line up and turned the last line down. Now, for me, the joy in remixing is making 1 or 2 exceptional moments within a track. And I think I've got that just coming out of the breakdown and back into the main section. So let me play you through that bit now, and we'll talk about how we've done it.
I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely since you went away. I've been so lonely without you every day. I've been so alone, feeling so alone. I've been so lonely, I miss you every day.
So I'm really happy with how we come out of that breakdown. It builds up really powerfully and then drops bang straight into the groove section. And we've been able to do it pretty much with sonic pressure. So you saw me do things like slowly move the noise amount up on the Juno whilst I was doing it. So at all times while I was putting this together, I had this kind of climax in mind. And then obviously by cutting literally everything straight on that snare drum, cutting all of the audio bits out, it has a huge impact. Now, if I had time, I would go through and actually put mutes on all of those channels that I cut, just to make sure that for that one section, no reverb or delays kind of hang over. But we've got plenty to do here, so let's get on. There is one other thing that I did that's quite a cunning little trick, just to make sure that your breakdowns can breathe. It's on the master fader, but it's not the kind of automation that you might think. You see this automation down here. What is it doing? Well, it's on a channel EQ that's doing some very basic EQ work just on our master fader. But I did also use it to pull the level into the compressor down. There is a bit of automation that during the course of the breakdown slowly takes the output of that EQ down 1 more dB and then slams it back in ready for the downbeat of the main drop. And what that will do is relax the audio that's going into the compressor and therefore the limiter. So you can basically get your breakdowns to breathe a little bit by doing tiny bits of automation like that. You don't want to go too far. A dB or so will get it done. Okay, now let's go through the rest of the stuff that I've done. So I took our Moody hook from the middle and took the top end off it. So it's an automated EQ move. Let me show you that in action. And also there you can hear the rise and level on the claps just as it comes into the breakdown. So what we've got keeping time really kind of cuts through at that point. You wouldn't want the clap that loud against the kick normally, but it works perfectly to do this kind of thing. Using filtering tricks like I showed you on that hook is an excellent way to introduce stuff on intros for club records. Now, these days, every single intro seems to be about 4 bars long on a club record. I remember the good old days where we had about 64 bars to really build stuff up, and by the time you'd actually hear a bass line, you were halfway through the track. But learning how to do this can be very, very handy indeed. And I'm going to show you the reverse use of that on the outro later on. Now, I have rebalanced the drums slightly to bring the principal instruments forward, like the kick and the clap and the hats. I've also added this enormous cavernous reverb for some kick explosions on the breakdown. So what I did was just put the kick onto a reverb plugin. I think it was one of the Valhalla ones. Put a massive reverb time on it, bounced it down, and then as you see, I've just cut the front of the audio file off, just because most reverbs generate a kind of attack phase that sometimes you don't want. It sounds like it's delayed. Great effect to really bring your breakdowns alive. I've been so lonely. And in clubs, that can have an absolutely enormous impact. Now, the most important thing that I want to show you is that, as we were talking about, all of these bass parts and the kind of, or low-end information parts and the growls, have been grouped together. I'm using the track stacking function within Logic. Every DAW has its own version of this. And most importantly, first things up is one of the best plugins you could ever spend $29 on. This is Fielding DSP's amazing Reviver. It is so simple. Gain in, gain out on the right, and 2 sliders. Second order harmonics, don't touch that, for some reason it sounds dreadful. Third order harmonics, it just adds weight and power. Now, third order harmonics are the types generated by tape machines, transformers, and valves. So it's all the stuff that as human beings we love. Let me show you the difference. In fact, I may have even been a bit light on that. I think we could go a little bit heavier. Don't want to muck up the balances too much. Bear in mind that you are adding harmonics, so you're adding information, so you may have to rebalance the part later on. Then that's just going into a sidechain compressor that's coming straight off the kick. Dead simple, though I have used the very simple Platinum Digital mode because you can get the attack phase incredibly quickly, and I don't want too much sidechain. I just want to pull it out for that initial sub-hit of the kick. So when that's put in with the drums, the whole thing can be quite powerful. Now, in any kind of mix that's heading towards the clubs, when you've got your kick and your bass working, you're in great shape already. So once I got those balanced against the drums, I knew we were kind of off and running. Now, you remember I showed you those filtering tricks on the intro parts? I've actually done the reverse at the end, and a low-pass filter comes in and takes all the top end slowly off the bass across the drums. So for anyone under the age of 25 watching this, that's how you keep the older DJs happy. Give them a nice long mixing outro. Right, so I've just had a good look round, and I've not actually done a massive amount of plugin work or very clever mixing work throughout the rest of it. I've done pretty much everything else with balance. And I can't tell you how important balance is. And what I mean by that is actually getting things in the right level. Don't just reach for the EQ plugins and the compression plugins. Get something sitting right within the track. If you're finding it difficult, then let me show you the two most important controls for any mix that you're ever going to find. This is my volume control. This is my stop button for the DAW. Turn the volume down whilst you're mixing every now and again, almost as low as you can. You'll be surprised at how easy it is then to pick out the right levels of things and be able to level things that you might have been struggling with. The stop button is the most important control in the studio without a doubt. Our ears tire really easily from fast transients and top-end information, and that's what modern music is all about. So after about 25 minutes, our hearing starts to deteriorate as our ears naturally try to protect themselves from the onslaught. So having a break, going outside, just listening to the traffic noise, do anything, but keep away from sound just for a little bit, for 5 or 10 minutes. When you come back, I promise you, everything will sound different, and that's because physically your ears are working differently. Okay, so back to the processing. Now, I wanted to widen the sequence up, and after some basic plugins, I just used Logic's spreader to bring it out. It's a great modulation effect, but its output is very wide. So I then pulled up the direction mixer just to bring it in a little bit, and then I suddenly thought, hang on, I remember something. Something's changed within Logic, and it's about the pan controls. So this is what the pan control normally looks like, and or used to look like from 9 till recently, and it was just a balance control that would swing the stereo image about. Now you can actually go to true stereo panning, and what that does is gives you two controls, one on either side, that is the effective pan controls of the two mono signals from the left and the right. So it allows you to actually bring stuff in from full stereo and move it about as well. Now this is incredibly powerful, and I know it's been on Pro Tools for years, and I think it's on Reason as well on its SSL copied mixer. But here's the theory. It's actually very bad practice to have everything completely wide in stereo. You don't really get a defined stereo image, even though that you think that you do. When everything's super wide, it's just too much information in the periphery of the speakers. If you can get used to bringing a few things in and controlling the panning width of stereo sources and then moving them about slightly, you'll be amazed at how much more definition you can get into your mixes. It really is a tip from the pros. It takes a lot of time and a lot of practice and a lot of investigation, but it's time very well spent. So I sorted our plucked hook out a little bit, just some gentle EQ. That's pretty much all it took. I just lifted the top end a little bit. But most importantly, I've added some different gain parts. So this bright one has been it's been moved up quite a lot to allow it to poke through in this section.
I've been so lonely since you went away.
And learning to make judgments about how loud things should be is one of the biggest disciplines to do with professional mixing. And do you remember we said earlier on, just before the breakdown, there's an awful lot going on. We're going to have to take some stuff out. So what I've done, you can see it's in shocking pink here. I've dropped the level of this little fella, just so there's a little bit more room for some of the other stuff to poke through, like this mood hook. So tiny little movements of that, making room for things that are coming in. But I've made this quite sectionalized, which is very useful for when we drop into big things like this. Now I did add one massively meta-flanged version of the strings. One of the things I have done here is do some duplicate tracks. So this part that I'm moving about here that's named power chords is the first sound that you saw going on the iPhone video. But this is where it changes and it's starting to pick out musical notes. So it's going to need a different set of processing than the rest of it. So whack the reviver on and a little bit more EQ to bring some of the lower notes out. But because that's a different set of processing from how I want it for the rest of the thing, rather than go through and automate everything, which I've seen people do before, I'm like, what are you doing? Just copy the track. Just create a new track, set the different sets of processing up. It's so easy. We've got unlimited tracks, as I say. Let's use them. Dirty organ, I needed a bass tone throughout this, so I've just done a nice big bass hump. There was quite a bit of sub-information floating around that was starting to eat up bandwidth and was sort of smothering some of the breakdown a little bit, so that's been rolled off. What we got, that's nothing, that's just going straight through. First channel of the Juno strings. As I said, I wanted to widen the strings up and make sure that they sat apart from the center image where there's so much else going on. And you can't get better at widening anything else than the Brainworks equalizer. This is the version 3, and it's actually all I've done is just a little bit of stereo width. I think there might be slightly more on the second one. No, I've used a chorus on that. IXLS's brilliant Chorus X, a vintage chorus emulation, and then the Metaflanger as well, just to bring it all in. So that's it for the breakdown, and you may be thinking, well, you're not done very much, have you? And it's like, yeah, but sometimes you don't need to. There's always this feeling that we should be doing more in our productions, but if it works, it works. And it's taken me a long time, and having been told off by a lot of engineers, to learn that actually, and an awful lot of this, doing less is actually more. Get your core sounds right, and you can't go wrong. Now, I just want to show you a nice bit of automation that's on the backing vocals. I've used the backing vocals by themselves just as it hits into the breakdown. That's why they're coloured light blue. They've been turned up as well. They're quite a lot, by 4.5 dB. But I also automated the mix of the delay that's actually on them. As they're by themselves, I want them to really sound nice and affected, and also automate the feedback so it really rises up at the end. Let me just solo that and you'll see what I mean.
I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely since you went away.
So a nice little trick there just to make that a little bit wetter whilst also rising the volume of that part. So this is what it sounds like in context.
I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely. I've been so lonely.
So real attention to detail, and once again we're making sure that it's all happening on the vocals. As I say, you are the custodians as vocal remixers of that song, and it's your job to do the best possible thing for it. So anything that you can do to just sweeten the vocal up is time well spent. You can see the automation on this rise vocal that we put in earlier. Now, I'm going to be totally honest, I'm really struggling to find things to show you on the rest of this because, as I say, most of it has been done with level, careful placement of stuff and poking things out with changing the region parameters, as opposed to tons and tons of plugins. And let me show you one more time the EQ setting that's on the master fader. Now, it's really gentle, and most importantly, all of the cues are down here. These are not sharp, pointy spikes that are coming into a digital EQ. Just take my word for it. Try an EQ a little bit more like this. I see people doing horrendous things with really sharp cues, bringing stuff all the way down, where actually a bit of distortion on that channel would help the sound sit an awful lot better. Adding some harmonics and some compression would really help it, as opposed to doing these ridiculous EQ moves. And I honestly think it can be blamed by some of the advertising that you see for the big equalizers, because the graph looks beautiful when you've got all this silly stuff going on, but it's not always the best way. Now, it took me a long time to unlearn all of the bad habits that I had and learn to EQ a little bit more like this, with big sweeping wide EQs. But it's how an awful lot of analog EQ responds, and it can be the best way forward to do it. So who taught me? Well, it was Kevin Granger at Wired Masters. He took one of my stems in from when we first pretty much met, one of the first things that we did together. And I was in the room, and he'd been working on it, and I came in, I said, "It sounds incredible, what have you done?" And he showed me some of the stuff. I'm like, "You've hardly done anything." but you've done everything. It's just, it sounds 10 times better. And he did then completely re-educate me about how you should be EQing, particularly at mix stage. This kind of stuff sounds far more natural, and doing it all with balance and that kind of thing. So anyway, preaching over. So now I think the best thing for me to do is play this down to you from top to bottom. So there we go. I'm really pleased with the way that that's turned out. I'm a total tweaker, so I'd love to go back in and change a few things. Even just playing it down there are things that I know I'd like to change. Now, often in remixing, the deadlines for the remix stop you doing that. Someone really famous once said that you never really finish a piece of music, you just abandon it, and I couldn't agree with it more. So I hope you've really enjoyed these 3 videos showing you all of the processes involved in vocal remixing. If you've watched all 3 of them, I really admire your dedication, and I hope you really managed to take a lot of tips and workflow ideas out of this process and apply it to your own work. And if you are going to head into this, I wish you the very best of luck. Please remember what it did for Russell and I. Off the back of some Beyonce remixes and a Kelly Rowland remix, we ended up touring the world and DJing on every single continent on the planet apart from Antarctica, which is not bad going if you think about it. And if we can do it because we're just average guys, then trust me, you guys can as well. So look, I wish you all the best. Don't forget that we've used 2 sample packs on this that are commercially available, F9 Drumtrax Volume 4 and Katherine Ellis's Diva accapellas available on Loop Masters. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.